Okay, I've got the Zoom pulled up. So back up at the top for the degree. Was anybody able to identify the degree for the first one? For the first function, where we have f of x is equal to negative 5x to the fourth minus 16x squared. How did you know that it was 4? What highest number? The highest, but it's not the high. 16 is a big number. What are those little, what's the little number called? Exponent, that's right. So up at the top, we're just gonna like explain what these things are and just more words. So yes, she is absolutely correct. The degree is the highest exponent. Or the biggest. And that is a question on your quiz today. So like some of these are right on your quiz. So we want to get those right. And talking to some of you guys, you've kind of mixed up like what is, like where do I find these parts? So what I'm going to do off to the side is I'm just going to write like a term. So we could have a term like 3x squared. So if you want to write that off to the side, we'll have enough room to write everything else down. And I just want to identify the pieces here. So the little tiny 2, that is called an exponent. The number that's in front, that is called a coefficient. What is the x called? Close. A constant is a number that's all by itself with no variable. What is the x called? Starts with a V. A variable. So the x is a variable. And that was another good term, Emmanuel, was a constant. A constant is just a number all by itself with no variable. So when we talk about the degree, you have to look at all your terms. You're going to have a few terms and you find the one with the biggest exponent. That's how you figure out the degree of your function. So whether or not you are even or odd, you can figure that out by looking at the largest exponent. And it's not a trick. So this made up term over here, what degree would this be? 2 or second degree. And would you say that that is an even or odd number? Even. So again, not meant to be a trick question. So if the degree is even, it is even. If it's odd, it's odd. So the number of possible real solutions. So we can't say number of real solutions because sometimes there are imaginary ones, but the number of possible real zeros also depends on that biggest exponent. And so it's equal to the degree. So for this made up problem, what would be the number of possible real zeros? 2. That's right, it's 2. So the number of possible real zeros is equal to the degree. The leading coefficient, that's a question on your quiz, so explain that to me. What is a leading coefficient? How do we figure it out? Say that again. What fits in the... No? Yeah, it's the coefficient of the front of the problem. So how do we know what is the front? What do we have to make sure? What kind of form do we need to be in? Standard form. So standard form where we have the exponents, do we start out with the biggest or the smallest? Biggest, and we go down. So if we start with 4, we have to have 4, 3, 2, 1, and then none, which is our constant. So when we're looking at the leading coefficient, you can't always assume that it's the very first term because sometimes they're mixed up. Most of the time they are in standard form, so it's the whatever's written first at the beginning of the problem. But the leading coefficient is just the number in front of the variable that has the highest exponent. So when you're in standard form, so you could write that in standard form. It is the first coefficient. So if you're in standard form, it's at the beginning of the problem. So it's what's written first if you're in standard form. So to figure out if your function is positive or negative, we also have to look at that very first term. We look at that leading coefficient. If the leading coefficient is positive, it's a positive function. If it's negative, then it's a negative function. So to figure out if you are positive or negative, so you have to be in standard form. In standard form is the coefficient positive or negative. So in standard form, we look at the very first term to determine whether or not you are positive or negative. The very last thing that we're going to talk about is y-intercept. And today is definitely not the first day that we have talked about a y-intercept. Y-intercept is when what is equal to 0? X, good job. The y-intercept is when x is equal to 0. So if x is equal to 0, let's plug in x, then solve for y. And with polynomials, it is pretty easy. Any questions about any of these terms before we get started and use them? Okay, let's do a problem, and then if you have questions, ask. So we're going to answer these questions by looking at the polynomial, and we're going to answer the questions. What's the degree? Is that even or odd? What's the number of possible real zeros? The leading coefficient, is it positive or negative? And then we're going to find the y-intercept. So looking at question 1, some of you came down and you answered this question already. Looking at this problem, is it in standard form? How do you know? Yes, the biggest exponent is written first. Do you guys agree? Okay. So the biggest exponent is written first. And so when you have the biggest exponent written first, that leading term tells us a lot of stuff. So that exponent tells us stuff, and then that leading coefficient tells us stuff. So I circled them. So for part A, it says, what's the degree? So what is the degree? 4. So we could say 4th degree. And will we say that that's even or odd? Even. Good job. Part B, the number of possible real zeros. Does anybody agree? Do we agree or disagree with Ella? You agree? She is correct. It is 4. It goes along with the degree. So yes, 4. 4 possible real zeros. Doesn't mean there is 4, but there could be 4. For part C, the leading coefficient. What is the leading coefficient? Jacob agrees. Anybody else? Yep. -5. And the leading coefficient tells us one more thing. It tells us if we're positive or negative. So Madeline, what do you think? Why? Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's negative because it's a -5. Very good. And then part D. Part D is when we plug in 0 for x. So if we plug in 0 for x, it would be -5. And we have 0 raised to the 4th power. I'll give you a minute to write it down. Our first day back from winter break, we talked about exponent rules. What is 0 to any power? And if you don't know, then you can type it in. You have a calculator. 0 to any power, because we're going to do that twice. We have 0 to the 4th power, and we have 0 to the 2nd power. What's 0 to any power? If you're not sure, type it in. 0 to any power. In this case, we're going to do 0 to the 4th power and 0 to the 2nd power. Jacob, what'd you get? 0. So when you said 1, I think what you were thinking is anything to the 0 power. That is 1. That is correct. But 0 to any power, it is just 0. So then what is 0 times anything? Just 0. So what happens is that this first term turns into 0. And then the second term, 0 squared would be 0. And 0 times -16 is just 0. What is 0 minus 0? 0. So that is the y-intercept. So solving for the y-intercept sounds a little bit more complex than it actually is. It's usually pretty simple. The second question, you guys are going to try that one. I'm going to pass back your papers and you are going to try question number 2. So I want you to try it on your own, but you're sitting next to your people. So if you've got a question, ask your people. Find a y-intercept, you can plug in x. X is equal to 0. So if I plug in 0 for x and 1 for x, they would be 0. That is, by definition, the y-intercept is when x is equal to 0. So that's every time. So we should be working on question number 2. This should be very quick. It would be a 0x, but for these problems, we don't necessarily have to have all the numbers. Really, we just use that. We figured out everything. Did you turn it in late? Okay, I will check. I don't see him in the pile. Yes, sir, Danny. You got a question on this problem? Okay, I think most people have answered it, so we're gonna do it together. So once I put it up on the board, Danny, if you still have a question, ask. So for the second question, is it in standard form? We've got the highest exponent. Is it written first? Yeah. The highest exponent 3, 2. Okay, yeah, I'm in standard form. Yep. I heard Lenina say we are a third degree. That is correct. Very good. Third degree, and 3 is an odd number. So for part B, the number of possible real zeros. Very good. And then what about the leading coefficient? It's a 4. Is that positive? And then to figure out my y-intercept, if I plug in 0 for x here and 0 for x here, then Vincent, what am I left with? -12. You end up with just -12. And a y-intercept you can also write like that as a point. Did y'all get -12? All right, the front side, easy? Yes, no? Michaela, what do you think? Front side easy? Okay, I think so. On the back is pretty easy as well. I'm just gonna switch it up. Instead of giving you a function, I am going to give you a graph. But before we do that, it's been a minute. My 5th period gets on to me because I don't do enough brain breaks. And so I found some emoji Pictionary. Have y'all ever done this? It's going to be quick. I think you're going to be good. So the first one, I'm sure you can tell me these are all fast food chains. What is it? Taco Bell. Starbucks. Viral subs. Yep. Wait. Almost. Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen. And Express. So for this one, and I agree with you, I think Chili's is, that's what I think of first, but he's right. As far as this quiz goes, the answer was Chipotle, but I feel like Chili's could be just as right. Domino's Pizza. McDonald's, yes, McDonald's, like McDonald's, oh, McDonald.
Oh, McDonald's.
Pizza Hut. Subway. That one's Burger King. All right, good job. So y'all did pretty good. In fact, all my classes have been doing really good with the emoji Pictionary. Y'all are good. On to the back. So on the back, we're going to be looking at the graphs and kind of working backwards. So when we look at the graph, we're going to be identifying certain things. Is it positive or negative? Is it even or odd? The number of real zeros, y-intercept, domain and range, and then local maximum and minimum. So the first question is, whether or not it is positive or negative. To figure this out, you look on the right side. So we're going to look at the right arrow. So checking these two first examples, if I'm just looking at the right arrow, I'm looking at, is my right arrow pointing up or pointing down? So for example 3, would we say that's up or down? Up. And so would positive or negative go with up? Positive. So for part A on question 3, it's pointing up. So we say that that is a positive graph. So we read graphs from left to right. To identify if something is positive or negative, it's how it ends from left to right. So for number 4, would we say that's positive or negative? Negative. So it is pointing down. We would say that that one is negative. Whether or not your graph is even or odd. So when you are even, your arrows will point in the same direction. When you are odd, they will point in the opposite direction. So to check if you are positive or negative, you're already looking at one side of your graph. Looking at the other side is going to help you determine whether or not you are even or odd. So when I look at question 3, that one's pointing up. And then my first one is pointing down. Are these in the same or the opposite direction? Opposite. So that is odd. Y'all are good. Number 4, it looks like I have one pointing down and the other one is pointing down. So we would say even. Good job. So the number of real zeros, so this isn't possible. This is for real. It is what you actually see on your graph. And another name for zeros, we've talked about this. Another name for a zero is a solution or a, no. Another name for a solution is a zero or an x-intercept. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at x-intercepts. The number of real zeros are the number of x-intercepts. So it's the number of x-intercepts. So looking at my graph, I am looking at where my graph touches or crosses the x-axis. So how many times does that happen on the third graph? 3 times. So the number of real zeros is 3. Look at the fourth one. What do you think that that is? You agree with Vincent? Yep, it is just 2. Right here and right here, it is just 2. The y-intercept, well, it's where you cross the y-axis. It's also when x is equal to 0. So it's just looking, this is the y-axis. It's always labeled. So you're looking along the y-axis. Where are you crossing? For this one, where do you cross? 0. So you could write it as a point or y equals. For number 4, what is the point that represents the y-intercept? Try again. What is it? -3 is the y value. How would we say that as a point? 0, -3. For the domain and the range, the domain is going to be another easy one. Because for these polynomials, they're continuous graphs. And so they might get wild in the middle, but on the two ends. We've got some variation of this going on. They keep going in both directions. So the range for all of these will be all real numbers. The range sometimes is also all real numbers. In fact, when it's odd, when you're pointing in different directions, when you have one pointing up and one pointing down, you go up forever and you go down forever, or if it's flipped, if you're odd, you will always be all real numbers because you've got something pointing up and something pointing down forever and ever. So when you are odd, it will also be all real numbers. So we have one of those examples that's odd. 3 is odd, so we can say, oh, we forgot to list our domain. For both of these, it's all real numbers. And for number 3, we can go ahead and say that it is all real numbers for the range too, because they point in different directions. When you have an even function, you've got to look at it because we have to figure out, it doesn't go up forever, so we can't say all real numbers, but you have to figure out where it starts. So for this graph, the highest you can go is 0, and then you point down forever, right? You agree? So our graph is less than or equal to 0. And so range goes with y. So we would say y is less than or equal to 0. So when you're an even function, you will use minimums or maximums to help you. So in this case, we use the maximum y value to help us. When it says local max or local min, I can't say what is the maximum or the minimum because, like for this graph, if it goes up and down forever in both directions, then can I ever get to a top or a bottom of your graph? No. So instead of talking about what's like the for real, which we would call like global or absolute maximum, because there isn't one, we would say what is the local or the relative. Another word is relative. I'll put this right here, relative. Relative or local mean the same thing. It means what's the maximum or minimum like in your graph, in the picture. So we're not going to pay attention to where the arrows are because those go on forever. But just within our picture, we can identify a maximum or a minimum. And so for this one, the maximum, well, that has a high point. This one's higher. So this would be my high point. And what we're describing is the y value. So it's the highest y value. And then for the minimum, it would be the lowest y value. So what's the highest my graph goes ignoring the arrow? No? 4. Do you understand why it's 4, Ella? The highest in your graph? Oh, sorry. I was talking about the highest first. Yes, it is 4. And then you are correct. For the lowest that your graph goes, it is 0. So that is the lowest my graph goes. For this one, if I wanted to identify the maximum, well, I look at those highest values. And what is the highest it goes for this one? 0. And what is the lowest, ignoring the forever? Hello, Vincent, do you see this -3 and not -4? Yeah. I'm going to finish passing out your papers. I want you to see if you can do number 5 and number 6. You can use number 3 and number 4 as a model along with your people. See if you can answer the last 2. Were they to determine did you turn them in on the practice day? Okay.
Yeah. Now.
Yes. No, because you were absent. I thought you were saying, why did I?
Oh,
You're saying, can you turn them in without a penalty? Yes, because you were absent.
Thank you.
The only one you are.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's number 5.
Question. 5, 6.
They're both
Wait, so.
I don't see the other two.
No, I have this one.
Okay.
But when I took the grade book, it said that I was missing 3 assignments and.
Then let me check. Because that one I just gave you back. Which assignment was that one?
This one?
Oh, you have a grade. You have a grade for 5-2. Is that 5-2? Yeah, there's a grade in there. The other ones, so the others are a mixture of assignments and there's a warm up. I think that's what it is. All right, let's look over the last two, see if you can help me. So for question number 5, is that one positive or negative? Is that the question? Yeah, positive or negative? Positive. Yes, we look at the right arrow. It is positive. Looking at both arrows, they are pointing in the same direction. So is that even or odd? Even. C is asking for real zeros. So this one, there's 1. I agree. 5 real zeros. What is the coordinate for my y-intercept? 0, -3. Very good. My domain. All real numbers. For my range, so it's not an odd function, so I have to think about it for the range. So how would I answer my range? Very good. So y is greater than or equal to -3. So you find is your graph got a high point or a low point? So when both arrows are pointing up, you're going to have a low point. So you find that low point and your graph is above, so greater than or equal to. For G, G's asking for the relative or local maximum. What would my local maximum be? Very good. It is 2. And then what's the lowest my graph goes in my little picture? I think we got it. What is it? -3. So question 6. Am I positive or negative? Negative, very good. So I have one pointing down, one pointing up. Is that even or odd? So when I'm odd, that makes my range a lot easier. What's my range when I am odd? All real numbers. I'm going to go ahead and jot that down. C is my real zeros. Very good. There are 2. And then what is my y-intercept? Y'all are good. And then for G, what's my high point in the graph? Yep, 4. So y is equal to 4. And what's the low point? 0. That is it, friends. So you're going to pack that away with all your other stuff. And we're actually going to rearrange the desks to get ready for our quiz. You're going to help me. It's going to look like this, and this is where you will go.